All right, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Ryan Evans. I'm with the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And today is part of our webinar series that runs every Thursday at noon. Of course, you can find recordings of all of these sessions as well as a schedule of upcoming webinars and other resources on our website at cap.unl.edu. And today we would love to have any questions that you might have as we go along entered into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or the chat box, and we'll work to get those answered at the end of the presentation. Today's topic is one that's important for many landowners, operators, and agribusiness professionals across the state. The Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report is issued every year by the Department of Agricultural Economics and the Center for Agricultural Profitability, based on the input of an expert panel comprising members engaged in agricultural land and rental markets throughout the state. This year's final report was published in July and is available on our Center for Ag Profitability's website, again, cap.unl.edu. To walk us through this year's report's findings, including the latest trends in land values and cash rental rates across the state and the economic forces behind them, is one of the report's co-authors, Jim Jansen. Since 2014, Jim has held the extension position of agricultural economist for the Northeast region, working in the Department of Agricultural Economics out of the Haskell Ag Laboratory near Concord. So right now, I will welcome Jim and turn it over to him.
All right, well, very good, Ryan. We'll go ahead and get the screen switched over here. So give us a second here. Let's see here. Okay. All right, well, very good, Ryan. Thanks for putting this all together once again for this week. And with this week's presentation, we'll be taking a look at the results from our annual Nebraska Farm Real Estate Survey and Report. Our survey, the final release, came in late June, and given with a busy summer, we were able to get on the schedule for this week. Co-author of this report is Jeff Stokes. He's our endowed chair of agricultural finance here at the University of Nebraska. And I work in the greater eastern part of Nebraska on issues related to land management, ag policy with Farm Bill, farm programs, FSA, NRCS programs, as well as different types of marketing efforts for grain and livestock producers across the state. So with that, I encourage anyone, as the questions are coming in, I got the question pane as well as the chat pane open, so you're more than welcome to type anything as you're going along. And yeah, so let's get started. So a few things, just a little disclaimer on here. The legal folks here at the university always ask us to say this. Everything we're discussing is based on the analysis of the survey results that were provided as part of the 2021 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Survey. Actual land values or cash rents will be subject to the quality of the land, local market forces, and anything of that nature for your area. So the first part, a little bit on the background of the Farm Real Estate Report, and you'll notice if you've seen this slide in the past, we are, Ryan Evans, our web and media specialist here at the university, has been pretty busy on redeveloping some of our websites. So our real estate survey, the website link for it has moved. And just a brief background, annually, the Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report and Survey has been done since 1978. We surveyed those folks with firsthand knowledge on what's occurring in the land industry. Appraisers, farm managers, agricultural bankers, other professionals in the industry. Preliminary estimates. So for 2021, the second Wednesday in March of 2021, published the preliminary estimates on land values as well as cash rental rates. The preliminary estimates don't provide nearly as much detail as the final report does in June, but it does give a pretty good snapshot on what direction land values, and maybe more importantly for those people on this call today, what direction cash rental rates are headed across Nebraska. You'll notice the Center for Ag website is where the report has been moved to, which is cap.unl.edu/real estate. It should take you there. And if you go to that website, be sure to take a look at hitting the download report. You can grab the entire PDF, which also has a lot of historical information towards the tail end of it if you're looking for that type of information. Okay, so if you take the state of Nebraska, we have 93 counties, 45 million acres of land. We have more irrigated cropland in this state than anywhere else in the United States. And how we have historically, and I believe how we will continue to subdivide the state, is based on what we refer to as the agricultural statistic districts, according to Mass. Some folks may be more familiar with the term crop reporting districts. I believe those regions are the same as the agricultural statistic districts are. But you'll see we subdivided the state into 8 different regions. Depending on where your property is, your land may follow one region a little bit closer than another. But as you'll notice, Lancaster County, where we're broadcasting out of today, is located in what we refer to as the East District. And Lancaster is a good example to show there. Sometimes there are cases where, for example, here in the East District, where this county almost drops a little bit into the Southeast District. And on some of these cases, you'll notice if you have a property right on a border between another area, it may be true that your property follows the trends of one region, even if it is geographically or technically inside the township of one county in the central or the east. So just be aware these lines aren't perfectly drawn, but they are something that has been identified by the USDA. And it's something that we continue to move forward with in the future. So briefly, we'll start on the land values, and the way I'll approach things today, we'll kind of start at the state level. So think big picture. We'll talk briefly on where current land, the market value of land is at, what's it mean for property taxes. Then we'll step down to the county level and district level. And then the final examples we'll be talking on will be describing estimating ways to actually capture a cash rental rate for your farm or ranch or whatever it might be that would be pertinent for possibly closing out your lease this year if you still haven't settled on final rate, or if you're looking forward to 2022 already, trying to get some rough ideas with that. So as we progress through the slides, you'll notice in the lower left-hand corner of what you're looking at, that is the average weighted value across the state of Nebraska for the certain type of land we'll highlight. For the state of Nebraska, we noted an average increase of 6%, and this was the market value. And it's important to notice that there's a difference between the market value versus something such as the assessed value. Those are different values that are defined differently, either by the state of Nebraska law or by the appraisal industry. And what you'll notice on here, as of February 1, 2021, compared to February 1st, 2020, the percent change, let's see here, I had to move my highlighter here, here we go. What you'll notice is we noted about a 6% increase. And if you've been following the news, you'll notice that there are other sources you can find this. For example, from the Federal Reserve, the USDA also does some cash rental rate surveys. Some surrounding states or states in the grain belt have also noted a slightly higher increase towards later on this summer. So it really depends at that period in time when you're looking at it. But as you notice when you review this slide, you see that the smallest increase was in the Southeast, came in just right at about 1,600, or rounded up to about 1,600. Other areas, it depends where you're at, but either things were steady to slightly higher. And this was for February 1, 2021. If you take the historic value for the state of Nebraska here in the lower left corner, and if you put it on a slide, which we have right here, and we do a look back here to 1979, and it goes all the way through to 2021, we have the average market value of land in blue, and then we have the marketing year average price of corn in red. Marketing year average price, what that means is it's a historic indicator or an average indicator of what the typical price would be over the marketing season for a crop. And as we know, and I'm sure everyone that's following us today, there's definitely a difference this year over, say, even 2 years ago. The price of corn is up significantly. You can use other crops, wheat, soybeans. On the grain or oilseed side, prices are much higher. The expectations for this fall are much better than they were even a year or two ago. The thing to note is if we have the price of livestock, say feeder cattle, fat cattle, while those prices aren't terrible, with higher input expenses primarily being feed sources or hay prices, that industry is a little bit different with respect to the profitability or the outlook on that. And also we're suffering from different degrees of drought across the state for the cow-calf producers especially. So you have to take into account where we're at with things. But overall, the value of what we can legally produce on ground, Nebraska clearly relates to some of these trends that we're starting to see, or the profitability was starting to get impacted or capitalized into the market value of land. My projection, just from my personal opinion, I do think we're probably going to see another slight increase. How much is anyone's guess, but I would suspect that we'd probably see a little bit higher land value moving into 2022. And we had a question come in here. So the question is, are you familiar with acrevalue.com? And the question is on the topic, there's acre value, and there are some other different websites where you can estimate the market value of land. Are these correct? Are the estimates correct? All I would say on this comment is they're using their process, and as our estimates are an estimate, I would assume acre value is providing an estimate as well. To truly know what your land is worth, you have to hire someone like an appraiser to give it a professional opinion of value. But as I said, estimates, they get you in the ballpark. They don't necessarily provide you a specific acre value, but they give you a generalized estimate. And there are different ways to find estimates, and it's up to the user of that to use it accordingly to the need. So the other thing that I think that kind of satisfies that question. The other thing we got here on the next slide is the cost of borrowing, long-term interest rates. On this slide, we have the 10-year Treasury bond rate. You could use, which people refer to as a T-bill. The 10-year is a very liquid market with respect to the trade on this, so that you always get a pretty good indication on kind of where long-term interest rates are going. And as you'll see, interest rates in the recent years, we were dealing with some downturns in the economy, and because of COVID-19 and that, and we've had to drop interest rates to some of the lowest levels we've seen. And if you want to talk about a downtrend, clearly from a historic perspective, interest rates have been trending down over time. And if you're in the market to buy land, we've been out on the road doing different land management meetings. And at one of the sites we did during soybean management field days, there was a finance professional there that came up after the meeting and indicated that at that point in time, a few weeks ago, you could get a long-term 30-year ag land loan with an effective interest rate of around 3.5% to not quite 4% interest. So with these low interest rates, if you talk about land, housing, cars, whatever it might be, the interest rates are getting capitalized. And what economists mean when they say that is, if you're in the market to buy something, you probably have a budget in mind, say a home. Well, if you wanted to buy a home in Lincoln, Nebraska, and you have a budget of, say, $1,200 a month, and you intend to take out, say, a 30-year loan, you can probably afford to pay a little bit more than what you might want to because of the lower interest rates and the ability to lock that in. So there's many different places you can get financing. Just be aware that the long-term interest rates are definitely having an impact. Now, the one concern that has been expressed at some of our meetings, and if you follow the news, it'll emerge in some of the consumer price index and some of these things, is inflation. We have dealt with inflation in a serious manner in recent years, but it's definitely a concern that we're having. So one of the ways to combat inflation, and if you think back to the historic time when the ag sector really struggled with in the 1980s, from that historic perspective here, raising interest rates is one way to combat inflation. So if that, looking into the future, if inflation is a big policy concern or a concern that the Federal Reserve would like to address, we'd maybe see the target rate on government treasuries and some of these things. Possibly it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say that we might see higher interest rates. But as of right now, we're seeing the ability to go out and purchase. Now, the cost to build things, the cost to acquire vehicles is definitely higher with COVID-19 causing some disruption in the supply chains. But nonetheless, the ability to go out and purchase things are at a rate that we maybe haven't seen in a while. So once again, this is the market value of land at a point in time. Something to be aware of, and I'm sure everyone, hopefully you took advantage of this if you were eligible, but from the Nebraska Department of Revenue, we pulled this slide together here back in February, and I think it still holds true. There were 5 different proposals or ballot initiatives that were on the state of Nebraska ballot last November. 3 of those indirectly or directly related to real estate taxes. And what I meant by that is one had to do with the legalization of gambling. Another one set up the legalization of gambling at horse racetrack facilities. One guided a commission or established a commission that would regulate the gambling. And then the third one defined exactly where the taxes went. And with all that tied together, there's tax revenue, or there's projections there will be tax revenue occurring from the legalization of gambling at horse racetrack facilities. And with that, the state of Nebraska passed a small state of Nebraska, not a federal, but a state of Nebraska income tax credit. And this credit goes towards offsetting a portion of your real estate taxes that helps support. So you get a income tax credit on a small portion, and this portion is projected to grow over time. So I believe I read an article in the Omaha World Herald, house valued at around $200,000. I think the credit for the last year's income taxes that we paid, the credit was fairly small, around $130 or $140. The point is if you own land and it's worth in the millions, well, that credit starts adding up. And also this credit, from my understanding, it appears that will be growing over time. So obviously real estate taxes are a concern that have been expressed by many of the readers of our report. But just be aware, if you have filed or will be filing taxes in the state of Nebraska, I believe you'd be eligible for a small state of Nebraska income tax credit. So be sure to be aware of that and take advantage of it if that is something you'd like to take a look at. All right, so once again, we'll kind of step into the regional areas. What we notice on dry land, we report 2 different types of dry land cropland, the estimated market value. And this is once again February 1, 2021 compared to February 1, 2020. And once again, some areas were just slightly steady, some areas were clearly higher. The rate of increase, even in the southeast, started hitting the low double digits. But if you start looking at these trends over time, I think that's the bigger picture. It's just not 1 year, but if you think about it over time. But you know, the dry land or irrigated cropland classes, it's not surprising to see them up quite a bit, given the profitability or the expectation and profitability that we might be seeing with higher commodity prices. Land non-tillable, so this would be the class that we're talking about that produces either pasture or rangeland in Nebraska. And you'll notice that some of these rates that are reported aren't up quite as much as what the prior slide was for dryland cropland. And one of those reasons are the cow-calf and feeding industry with drought, cost of hay, some of these things, prices haven't increased it quite to the extent that we have seen for corn, soybeans, or wheat. And as a result, we did see a slight uptick, but not quite as much. In the bigger macroeconomics in the cattle industry, there's been some fairly severe drought according to the drought monitor in the western half of the United States. And if we would kind of look back on history, say back to like 2012, the last time we had a severe drought or a drought that covered a very large area with respect to the severity of it, we've seen a change in the cattle cycle with livestock inventories at the national level. And if that'd be something that we would see happen again, we might see a little bit higher prices for the price at the farm gate for livestock, not necessarily at the grocery store. I know some of those prices are quite high right now too, but they haven't directly translated to the price that feedlots are receiving or cow-calf producers are getting when they take their cows or calves to the fall in the calves to the livestock market or whatever in the fall. right, so the highest priced land class we have reported in the state of Nebraska came from center pivot irrigated cropland. Some of the highest priced sales we had reported came either in the Northeast district, where we're looking at right here. And also we've seen some sales down along Interstate 80 and the York, Seward area, areas where we have very high presence of production of commercial seed corn or commercial seed stock for growing them next year be marketed by seed corn companies or seed companies this fall and winter, and then replanted somewhere in the United States again this following spring. We've seen a lot of the ground that has the ability to participate in those contracts, which we tend to see quite a bit of it along Interstate 80 here. Some of those sales were quite robust as well. And we've seen that reflected here, the eastern half of Nebraska, as well as that central district, which incorporates places like Grand Island, Kearney, things of that nature. Seeing some very strong market value, very strong values, market value of land across Nebraska. Okay, so we're going to switch here. All right, so I know those slides, when you start looking at just the sheer numbers, they get a little bit too much to take in sometimes. So when we're looking at the outlook on land, so if you would step back to if you were someone that took our survey, and we asked them basically, what do you anticipate the market value of land to be headed here in the upcoming 2021 or 2022 season? What we've seen was this chart right here. The easiest way to read this is if you're seeing blue lines or blue chart lines on this horizontal bar chart, you're seeing them on the right-hand side. That means the industry people, the people dealing with land transactions, expect the market value to increase. And if we see them on the left-hand side right here, we expect a decline or a negative force impacting them. Some of the top things: current crop prices, interest rate levels, which we highlighted early on, purchases for farm expansion, typical things you might think about, reasons why people want to acquire land. Things weighing down on the farm real estate markets, input expenses, which is on slightly negative. Bigger things: future property tax and property tax levels, future property tax policies. This is obviously an issue that is actively debated each and every unicameral session, as well as concern expressed by those that take our survey. And it's kind of the breakdown on what we're seeing. So I would say, based on these people that took the survey, I would probably speculate that it's a fairly bullish period of time that we're seeing right now, with different prices, and also some of the different disaster payments that have been paid out in Nebraska have definitely provided liquidity, increased profitability, or the ability to acquire assets of different kinds at a much more competitive manner than what they may have been able to do in prior years because of their ability to purchase. All right, so we'll step over here into the cash rental rates. So think at the big scale, we'll step down to the county, and then we're going to step down to the farm. So the first part we have right here is the average cash rental rate for dryland cropland in 2021. Breakout that we see here is at the regional level. And with the regional level, you can see that we're either steady, slightly higher. And once again, keeping in mind, if you do see a large percent increase, keep in mind in some of these areas where the cash rental rate, say for $30, for example, well, a 9% change might have been $3 or $4 an acre, a little over $3 an acre, or whatever it might have been. That's a lot different number with respect to the dollars per acre versus a 5% or a 7% when we get in here in the eastern part of the state. So the question on the survey was, we asked people to respond to our survey, and we asked them to provide an estimate on average cash rental rate by region. And also, beyond the average cash rental rate by region, what we do on this slide is we refer to it as HAL on the breakdown of cash rents. HAL stands for the average of the high grade, average of the low grade, and average of all the responses. And it might be better placed to say the average of the high grade would be actually the average of the high third of cash rent. So the question is, what do you estimate the high third of cash rent is? And what do you estimate the low third or the low grade of cash rent? We do not break out any of these cash rents by things like soil type, anticipated crop yield, location with respect to the individual county. We report these survey estimates by region here to provide kind of a breakdown by the region. So once again, HAL stands for the average of the high third, average of the low third, and the average of all the responses for the particular area according to those survey participants. Another source of cash rental rate I wanted to talk about, this is independent from the University of Nebraska, but the USDA does a county level cash rent survey. It's done by a group called the National Agricultural Statistics Service, which is referred to as NASS. And with NASS's survey, I believe they traditionally do them in odd numbered years. So 2021, obviously we're in an odd numbered year. And they did do the survey in 2020. And when we post our slides online for this presentation after this is ended today, you'll note you can actually go on the slide here and look for this link. And if you can find this link, you can actually find the USDA publication. A few things to note on the USDA publication. I just wanted to provide this as a reference and be aware of some good work that's done here as well. We have a breakout of cash rental rates by county. So we have a pretty good breakout here, certain areas of the state. And I say, think of this as kind of like a cookie cutter. You can gain some insight on how cash rental rates vary across these counties. And then when you work into some of these areas, if you see a county that's in white, obviously there's not very much, if any, dryland cropland out in the sandhills. Or if you're in some of these areas, if they didn't get enough responses, there wasn't an average that was produced to protect the identity of anyone that took the survey. So this information is traditionally updated in late August or early September. I believe this map usually gets posted on their website around the second Friday in September. Not always, but it's usually a pretty good indication. And we can gain some insight here. And what we tend to see is when you evaluate each of the districts, not always, but we tend to see some of the higher cash rental rates, usually on the eastern side of the district. And then the western side tends to be a little bit lower, especially when it comes to dryland, cropland. One of the biggest factors being things like rainfall, soil type also impacts it. But as you farther west you move in our state, the less rain we tend to get over. Historically, we tend to get less rain. Switching gears over here to the irrigated cash rental rates. So the rates at the University of Nebraska, as well as the USDA reports, this would be for the entire irrigated parcel of ground. And what I mean by entire, this would include, for example, on gravity, you'd be talking the use of the irrigation equipment. So if you got a pump and a power unit, things like that. Center pivot, it would include that actual pivot. Historically, if you look at the University of Nebraska information, the gravity irrigated rates tend to rent for anywhere from around $30 to $50 an acre less than what center pivot does. And with the breakout on that, once again, we have an average of the high third. So I ask people to take the survey, just want to drill this down. Average, we ask them, what do you estimate the upper third of cash rents are? You read the high grade. What do you estimate the low third of average rents are? That's low grade. And then what do you estimate the average of the cash rents are for an area? And with gravity irrigation, things like the quality of the water availability. So are you concerned about being restricted during the growing season? Location of your field relative to grain terminals, all those things, competitiveness of the area, whatever the case might be. Center pivot irrigated cropland. We do have a breakout on the gravity irrigated, but for the sake of time today, I'm just going over which slides I feel might be the most important for the average person on. I will post our entire slide set after this presentation, and you can take a look at all of the breakouts on cash rents by a region, by the upper and lower average. Okay, so on the center pivot irrigated rental rates, this is the average cash rental rate for the entire use of the ground plus the system. So the pivot, pump, power unit, and the land. If the tenant provides one of those components, you would discount the cash rent to account for that. And the breakout, we see the eastern third tends to have the highest cash rents when it comes to center pivot irrigated cropland, and we tend to see lower rates the farther west we move. In addition to that, the quality of the system is a big thing. And I think in some of these years when we start having maybe a little bit of a breakout where the restrictions become a little bit more present when the drought occurs, water availability is a big issue. And also the quality of the water. Some areas of the state have pretty deep wells, and the quality of the water relative to other areas may not be quite as good. So all those things, water availability, quality of the system, and how good of a system do you have? What kind of system? Systems that are requiring a lot of upkeep may not rent quite as much because the individual renting the ground may have to invest additional time. So with the breakout on irrigated cropland cash rental rates, we see this is rated by county here. And you'll note, for example, in southeast Nebraska, we don't tend to see a lot of irrigated cropland there, just given how the availability of water irrigation, as well as certain areas of Sand Hill and other parts. But if you're in Holt County, for example, there may have not been enough responses reported that they could produce an estimate with confidence. So think of the county estimates as a good way you can kind of back out and compare your cash rents. And everybody keeps asking me, where are cash rents headed in 2022? And what I will tell you is think about just not where they headed, but where have you been? And what I mean by that is if cash rental rates, if you're on the upper end of the upper end when it comes to cash rental rates, I don't know if you're going to see a lot of increase next year or whatever. You kind of have to peg where you're at. So I encourage people, if you rent land or if you rent your land to someone, use these different resources to kind of back out an estimate on, how do things compare? And once again, the 2021 rates from the USDA, those will be published here within the next month, or less than the next month even. But their website and can be noted on that prior slide. All right, so I'll move over here into grazing land cash rental rates. In Nebraska, the typical two ways that we take a look at renting cash rental rates is either by the acre or by the pair. And the breakdown that we have on cash rental rates by the acre, we can see on the slide here, which is typically impacted by the stocking rate and the competitiveness of the area. Obviously, Northwest Nebraska area require more acres to support one cow calf or a stocker than what you would in the Northeast. And on the breakout of cash rental rates by the acre, beyond the stocking rate, think about the quality of the land. Some of the rangeland in the state's very nice. Some of it can be quite rough with respect to how many acres it takes to support the pairs. So that has a big impact. And also when you get into parts of the Northeast, for example, or the East, may not be quite as much grazing land in those areas as there are in the Northeast or the North or the Northwest. And that gets reflected into the rate that's fitted. The rate that I tend to talk a little bit more about and focuses on the cow calf rental rates. So this is for one cow, one calf during the summer grazing season. And with respect to the cow calf cash rental rates, what influences these rates, or what influences the cash rental rates by the acre? Well, when it comes to cash rental rates for grazing land, think about what has to be upkept. So you have fencing, water source possibly, depending upon the party that's willing to do some of those things would definitely influence the rates. And the cow-calf pair rates here for one cow, one calf for 1 month during the summer grazing season. So if you're, say, for example, in the Southwest District where the rates are on average about $50 a pair, you would take roughly 50 or 51 times 5 would give you an average just a little bit over $250 a pair. If you're grazing for more than 5 months, less than 5 months, you can maybe make some adjustments. But this is a breakdown on cow-calf pair grazing rent rates on a per pair basis. Okay, so we'll move over here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about trends and lease arrangements for 2021, or even when we're starting to set up for 2022. three different ideas on how to set cash rental rates. And these cash rental rates can vary quite a bit depending on where you're at in the state. So I'm going to give you some different ideas on how to kind of drill some of these down for the end of 2021, or you can even plug in for 2022. The first idea we have here is adjusting rental rate from the survey information. So you may look at the USDA, you may look at the University of Nebraska, or maybe there is even another source you might look at. But if you divide the average county rental rate by the average yield, excuse me, if you divide the two together, you get what is referred to as the average county rent per bushel. The average county rent per bushel in this example is $1.13. So 135 divided by 120 gives us an average county rent per bushel of $1.13 a bushel. We slide the average county rent per bushel to the upper right-hand corner and times it by the average yield. So the APH yield comes from crop insurance. And with the APH yield, you might be able to use, say, maybe you might use the last 3 or the last 5 years of the average yields produced from crop insurance. You take the APH yield times the county rent per bushel. This gives us an estimate for the farm level cash rent for a property. In this example, we adjust the cash rental rate down slightly to account for the fact that we have a property that yields less than what the average yield is in this particular example. Second example we have right here relates to soybeans. And I really like this example because it gives us a little bit of an idea on when we think about kind of risk or scenario planning, evaluating how cash rental rates, what you might agree to, vary during the growing season. So in this example, we have a split of, let's say, we have a split from raising soybeans. And on this field, it yielded just over 50 bushel per acre. So the landlord gets half the yield and the tenant gets half the field, or we anticipate it would historically yield a little over 50 bushel per acre. So if the landlord gets half the yield in this example, if you take 26 bushel per acre, which is their half, times the estimated marketing price. And you'll notice when you look at these three major columns here, and the to the left, to the center, and to the right, under these scenarios, that price varies depending on where you're at. And if you take those two together, the landlord's share of the crop revenue per acre, you may not think of it that way, but when you produce a crop on crop share, the landlord's taking a certain percent of the crop revenue. And in this example, the crop revenue per acre, if you take off half of, say, the seed, fertilizer, or chemical expenses, which I actually pulled these from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln soybean budget for the soybeans that Glennis McClure puts together, which if you're looking for cost production estimates, I'm sure she's getting well into the 2022 budgets here in the next couple of months. A lot of good resources that are posted online that you can take a look at some of those budgets. But if the landlord under a typical 50-50 split would be paying for half of either the seed, fertilizer, or chemicals. If you take the difference between the landlord's share of the income minus their share of the expenses, you get the effective net return to the owner, or what someone might be willing to offer for cash rent if the landlord would be demanding a cash rental rate. And the reason I really like this example is it's being equitable. You're dividing the revenue and also dividing the expenses. And when we progress through the growing season, when you talk about the expenses, you know, those, especially with soybeans, I would imagine seed, fertilizer, and chemicals, those expenses should be very well known by now. Might have been some fungicide or insecticide application this late summer, but overall, those numbers are usually locked down pretty good, or you have a pretty good idea on what those might be. In fact, I would suspect many operators are getting ready for 2022 now. Many seed input, different kind of agronomic suppliers are probably getting marketing information ready for their potential clients, getting some of those numbers ready right now for the 2022 season. And when you work through these examples, if you hold the expenses steady, the only thing that varied from one period to the next period was the price, but you can see the average cash rent, depending on where you're at on this, kind of varies. And I tell people in our live presentations, what's the most equitable rate or the most fair, which some people refer to, well, it's probably going to be reflective of what was the actual price and what was the actual yield. Now, we didn't even get into the discussion of drought in this presentation, but one would probably anticipate if this is dryland soybeans in Nebraska, unless you were blessed to get some really good rainfalls, your bushel per acre might not be 26, maybe it's only 20, 22, 23. And that would be reflected in the final cash rent. So if you're trying to speculate on what cash rents should be for 2022, maybe take a look at the cash 2021 crop budget if the 2022 isn't quite available yet. Start adjusting with some of those expenses. I would probably speculate that fuel and the budget, things like fertilizer, chemicals or seed, they're probably going to be up. I don't have anything to back that, but that's just my suspicion, especially with fertilizer. It appears those are trending a lot higher than they did. With those things, we can kind of gain some insight if you start playing around with your scenario. Maybe you can start estimating your cash rent for 2022. And one expense, well, this might be expensive if you're a tenant having to rent land, but one question that's been coming in over the last couple of weeks to many of our offices that we've fielded has been on the topic of hay. What the fair cash rent for hay prices, given, we're in an area of the state, many areas of the state are quite dry. Some people are getting to put up hay because of the emergency haying and grazing, or maybe you have a parcel of ground that you have an odd shaped piece that you choose just to hold it in grass. It makes more sense, especially if it's erodible. Well, if that's the case and you have a tenant that's willing to put that property up for hay, how do you set the cash rental rate? Well, in this example, the field actually yielded 2.5 tons per acre of grass hay. And if you go on the USDA website, one resource comes from the AMS, the Agricultural Marketing Service. And with that division, they provide a weekly hay report on different auction prices for hay. At the time when this was put together, the average price was around $100 a ton for good quality grass hay. Well, if you had, say, for example, a 33-67 or a 50-50 split, so this would go 1/3, 2/3, or the 50-50 split, how much hay the landlord would get would be reflected in accordance with the share of that lease. And if you take that share times a price, gives you the estimated income, which once again, if you're on a 1/3, 2/3 split, landlord may not be paying any of the input expenses, but if you're on a 50-50, maybe the landlord and the tenant decided to throw out $20 of nitrogen this past spring, which prices of them were probably lower than they are now. Maybe this number might be $35 this upcoming year. But under a traditional 50-50 split, the landlord would probably be splitting half of the seed, fertilizer, or chemicals at a minimum. And with that, you can see the breakdown depending on what share you take. If yields were to be down, that would also get reflected in it. So anytime you're doing a cash equivalent from a share, keep in mind some of these key numbers. And they just give us one way to estimate cash rent if you're dealing with an odd property that you don't have a good history on. This is an equitable way because you're accounting for the hay yield, prices, and possibly input expenses. It's part of the share agreement. So one final example on how to set cash rents. Land is an investment. It's actually a business. There's a lot of sentimental attachments associated with land, but land isn't in business, and with it being a business or an investment, you have to think about how to set the cash rents. And with setting the cash rents, if you know what the market value of the land is, and you have to be careful when you work through these numbers, because if you put a too big of a market value or if you put too high of a rate of return, your cash rent's going to reflect a number that's probably not reflective of what is appropriate or anticipated given the potential of your ground. Market value times the rate of return gives us an estimated cash rental rate. Thing to note on this slide is if you take either the rate of return or even better, maybe the cost of long-term borrowing on the land loan, if you take the rate of the rental rate and divide it by the rate of return, or some people might use the cost of borrowing the money, it also is another way to estimate the market value of land. There's an inverse relationship between the rate of return and the cost of borrowing. If you take the rate of return and divide it by the rate of return, or some people might use the cost of borrowing the money, it also is another way to estimate the market value of land. There's an inverse relationship between the rate of return and the cost of borrowing the money. between the market value of something versus a rate of return. As the rate of return increases, all else equal, you're probably going to see a decline in the market value unless we tend to see things really increase. Okay, so with that, that kind of brings us to the close of our how do you set a cash rental rate. I got one question that came in. So the question we had coming from somebody that's joining us today: are the tenants responsible for typical things in a pasture lease? Fences, livestock watering source, maybe upkeep, repairs, other common things. I'm from Cedar County, Nebraska, so there's obviously a lot of cedar trees, or that's at least at the time what the county was named after. Who's responsible for maintaining or upkeeping those things? Well, for one thing, there's no set standard. So if you're an absentee landowner, if you're someone that owns land and say you own land all the way out in Kimball, Nebraska, but you live in Omaha, I wouldn't anticipate you, landlord, maybe being very interested in trying to do the basic upkeep on the property, just given the distance from one property to another. But if you have a tenant that's willing to do some of these things, you would negotiate it in. Typically in a pasture lease, you would anticipate the property with a decent fence around it, minor upkeep on that fencing, digging in a post or two. That's maybe not such a big deal. So when you have to replace an entire quarter-mile of fence, the expenses really start adding up. And in my opinion, and my colleague Alan Benalik and others in our department, we probably agree that major upgrades to the property, drilling a new stock well for water, putting in a new quarter-mile of fence, any of those big capital expenditures where you're making an investment in something that's probably going to last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe not quite 50, but I guess if you drill a well in the ground, it might, the actual hole in the ground might last 50 years, but the pump may not. But with those expenses, those are typically a tenant's a landlord's responsibility. Minor upkeep could be something the tenant might do. The other thing with weed control or brush, if you know you have a property that has a lot of issues, can you subdivide that property? So say this is a field right here. Can you subdivide that property into areas that over time, in year one, are you going to be covering this box right here where it says farm? And then year two, you're going to cover this part of the ravine. And year three, you're going to do this part. If you have a tenant that's willing to do some of these things, one way to incentivize someone is to maybe take off some cash rent, come up with a management plan. And if the tenant is willing to put in the fence, how much does that mean on a per acre or per pair basis for the grazing season? Everything's negotiable when it comes to leases. It's what can you get someone to agree upon? Okay. So final thing I wanted to highlight today. Each year we have what we call the special feature section from our survey. This year we took a look at land auctions in Nebraska during 2020 because of COVID. COVID in certain areas, municipalities or the health district limited in-person gatherings of various sizes. So for those people that took our survey, how were land auctions adjusted in 2020? For example, 31.5% of the people that responded to the survey said that we had an increased presence on online auctions or an increased presence of online and public. I think we've been seeing for the last, say, 3 to 5 years that we've seen some of these things, but COVID kind of started pushing us along to at least consider them or have the option in combination. Also, we've seen people reporting that we didn't either have as many public auctions or some kind of a delayed listing. Why? So what was the major consideration or motivation identified by people that take our survey? And why do this, or why are we going to an online auction? Well, the overlying reason might have been because of the region, because of COVID-19, different health requirements that were imposed, and also the location. If you're in some of these areas, some of the public health districts, we set standards on how many people. The other thing is the bitter characteristics of their personal health concern, but also things like if you have a property that had recreational potential, if you go to online auction or an online auction combination, online in person, that allows you to kind of gain some insight into gaining access to maybe someone that lives in some place that's far from the property, somewhere in the metro area, somewhere in eastern Nebraska instead of western Nebraska. So moving forward into 2021, what were people reporting on? Overall, we've seen a lot more combination online and public auctions. I think that what we tend to see now is a lot of people reporting that, okay, if the land sale is supposed to occur on September 1, well, 2 weeks before the actual in-person bidding, you might have seen a combination deal where maybe it started as an online bidding and that online bidding ends before the live auction or is in tandem with the live auction. But I think we're starting to see a lot more online or a combination of those, just not for land, but also starting to see that in the machinery for different websites that market machinery. And the transaction method identified for land sales in Nebraska, kind of we took a litmus test of what are people reporting on that they're seeing. Well, what we've seen as part of our survey, we've seen public auctions still account for a good share, combination online or online auctions, and also we've seen that listing and sealed bid. That was also a very common use of a way to market land. I'm going to run through a few slides here and then we'll take any questions. So we got to look here. If you don't have a lease in writing, great website. We always got to give a plug for this website is aglease101.org. Be sure to take a look at that website. If you go to the website and hit the document library tab, bring up lease publications as well as forms. Remember the verbal lease deadline is September. You have to let your landlord or tenant know before September 1 if you wish to terminate your verbal lease, even if you want to renegotiate the terms of a verbal lease or move to a written lease. So this is a great place to find that kind of thing. If you like our stuff we've been talking about today, there's a few meetings that we had left. We've been doing meetings for the last, I guess, maybe 6 weeks already. And we're getting towards the tail end of them here. But with those meetings, we have one coming up in Omaha, another one in St. Paul, and as well as Saunders County at the Eastern Nebraska Research Extension and Education Center up at Meade. I believe there will be a lunch provided there. And take a look at the Center for Ag Profitability website, cap.unl.edu. Scroll down to the bottom part of the webpage, and that's a great place to have it. And the other thing I wanted to mention is put together by Jessica Grosskopf. Jessica does the part of our women in agriculture efforts, outreach efforts. And she did a new meeting that she put together this year that will be hosted in Lincoln at the Animal Science Complex is the Heard That Conference. It's targeted for the Women in Ag or Women in Agriculture program audience. So be sure to take a look at this website. You can find more details on how to get registered. And I do believe for the September 8th meeting, we will be having a lunch associated with that. And finally, the one thing that Alan Badonic and myself do is called Ag Land Management Quarterly. And with Ag Land Management Quarterly, it's free. Once a business quarter, we kind of talk on current topics on what's happening in the land industry. With our presentation here, tends to be talking on the county level cash rental rates from the USDA NAS. So we'll be getting an update on that. Update on ARC and PLC. I don't anticipate we're going to be seeing a lot of payments from these programs just given where prices are, but we'll give any update on that. See if I can get some materials from our ag policy specialist, Brad Lubin. And harvest season, Alan and Alex going to take a look at closing out leases and considerations for leases in 2022. And by always, if you go to this website, up here for our land management quarterly, be sure to take a look at submitting a question if you have anything. Okay, with that, I'm going to start going over questions. And all right. So a question we had come in, where can you get more information on the market value and assessed value by the law? Well, the one place that was mentioned is early on in our slide set, We talked about the market value of land. And if you take a look at the Nebraska Farm Real Estate Report, I believe it's tables 1 through 5 in that report. Take a look at the market value of land. And with that, you can get some breakdowns by region of the state. And we also provide an average of the high grade, average of the low grade, or average of the high third, average of the low third by region. And when it comes to, they also asked about assessed value by law. Remember, assessed value in the state of Nebraska, my understanding is we are using a 3-year median ag land value. And I would just stop by your local county assessor and they can probably direct you towards some property tax assessment division information if you're looking for information on that. Okay, so the next question we had come in, just came into the chat here. We had the question, what is the rate of return on calf sales on pairs? I'm not exactly sure what that question is getting at, but let's just take a quick look at the grazing land rental rates by pair. We have the breakdown right here, and we also do have a rate of return on grazing land, which I guess would indirectly be cow-calf pairs. It's in table, I believe it's table 5. Let me look here. I noted right here. Let's see here. Yeah, it's in table 5 of the real estate report. So if you get on the website, you can look up actually the rate of return by region of the state. But I would say grazing land tends to have a rate of return less than cropland based on the information reported, probably looking a little bit closer to in the low 2s or about 2%. And how do you address if you have cedar trees, noxious weeds, brush, any of that? Well, if you know you got a problem, a tenant may not be very motivated to help control that problem if you can't talk about negotiating that in the cash rent. So my suggestion is if you have that issue, you have an entire quarter that has a lot of issues, subdivide the property, maybe take a look at lower cash rents to help incentivize people to work hard on it. So take a look at lower cash rents and try to subdivide that property and address it over time. There might be different types of USDA, and I'm not sure on this, but there might be different types of funds available to help combat some of these issues. Always stop by your local USDA service center and see what programs they might have available. There might be something that could help cover a portion of those costs. And how often are leases renewed? Okay, so the question is, how often do you renew your lease, especially if you have an owner of the property that's in advanced age? Well, when it comes to renewing cash leases, Alan and I think some other people on our team have always said an equitable way to do it is do it a year-by-year basis. The reason we like to address it year by year is if you address it year by year, you can actually reflect into those cash rental rates the what's happening that year. Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it good prices? Poor prices? Good yields anticipated? Poor yields anticipated? So my suggestion is a year-by-year lease. Now, if you're an operator, you're probably going to want a lease that's more than a year, because if you're doing a good job fertilizing, a good job keeping brush down, whatever, you want to know that your time that you might be investing into that site. Remember, things like fertilizer, you just don't get one response for a year, but highly productive tract of land is going to be productive into time if you do a good job fertilizing and good conservation practices. So they may want it for multiple years, or if you have someone that's older, an aging landowner, you might have a case where they want to have a multi-year lease. My only comment on a multi-year lease is have a provision in there where you can renegotiate the cash rent or some kind of a flexible component, because with prices where they are now, who the world knows where they're going to be headed in the future. Oh yeah, please note, take a short 3-question survey about our presentation today. It's posted in the chat. Ryan Evans has posted it. By all means, we appreciate any feedback. If you like what we're talking about, if you don't like it, just let us know how we can improve and keep making these things better. All right, so a final question we got, unless somebody else pops one in, but I see people are starting to trail off and it's almost 1 o'clock. If seed corn is grown by a tenant, so if you're contracting with a seed company to grow commercial seed corn on a property, so seed corn is something you plant the following year that would be marketed through the seed corn marketing company, you know, whatever input company. How do you set the cash earn on that? Well, I would challenge you to take a look at that cash equivalent from share. I think you could set up an example like this where you might be able to take a breakout and looking at the revenue and expenses associated with that share, somewhat similar to what we have here. That might be an equitable way to set that. Okay, with that, it is 1 o'clock and I haven't seen any other questions come in. So please reach out to us if you have any other comments, questions, concerns, but I think we had a really good group on today, so we appreciate everyone for joining. Oh, all right. One last minute question, I'll answer it. I just happened to see it. What is considered to be the traditional grazing season? It's traditionally 5 months. Now, if it's a drought year, you might cut that short because of the drought. But to either the grazing season starting on May 1 or between May 1 to June 1 or even June 1 usually runs about 5 months. So if you started May 1st, it'd be May, June, July, August, September, pull the cattle out on October 1. If you started June 1, you might run them till November 1st. So, all right, I believe that question is answered. And I think that's all the questions we got time for. And thanks for joining us today, and we appreciate your time.
All right, thank you so much, Jim. If you wouldn't mind maybe just putting up the slide if it has your contact information there, if people have more questions so they can get a hold of you. It seems like we have a lot of people on today working with livestock, and that's great. Just want to let you know that at this point, we are looking next week for a webinar on Thursday at a session on winter cow care agreements and more on pasture leases. So we hope to get that information together and post the registration for that tomorrow. So be watching our website, cap.unl.edu. And if you're on our email list, watch your email for that. And just a reminder, if you could please take a minute to complete that brief survey. The link is in the chat box. And again, check our website, cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu for an always updated schedule of webinars we have on the books, as well as an archive of all of these past sessions. And the recording of today's webinar, along with Jim's slides, should be posted there by tomorrow afternoon. So with that, thank you again, Jim, and thanks to everybody for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you again soon.
Very good. Thanks for joining us.